Thank you, Ambassador Lambert. Honorable Roosevelt Skerrit, Prime Minister of the Commonwealth of Dominica and also the Minister for Finance. Your Lordship, the Most Reverend Gabriel Malze, Bishop of Roseau, other honorable members of Cabinet, Honorable Lennox Linton, Leader of the Opposition, Dr. Didicus Jules, Director General of the OECS Commission, Your Excellencies, members of the Diplomatic Corps, honorable members of Parliament, Your Excellency Edward Lambert, Ambassador and Principal Advisor to the Prime Minister, Your Worship the Mayor, Mrs. Irene John, Permanent Secretaries, presenters, observers, Father Charles Martin, delegates, other invited guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, including those listening via radio and other social media. A pleasant good morning to you. Shortly after the passage of Hurricane Maria, the government engaged itself along with other development partners in the conduct of a post-disaster needs assessment. The results basically indicate that the damage was estimated to be US 941 million or EC 2.5 billion. The loss was estimated at 380 million or 1.1 billion. And the needs are estimated at 1.4 billion US or 3.7 billion EC dollars. That figure, 3.7 billion EC dollars, could increase as the actual value of the needs will only be costed once we have defined more clearly the projects and we enter into contractual arrangements. Government has determined that it will, in fact, prioritize some projects, and in the first year will seek to do work valued at just under $300 million. In 1 to 3 years, work valued at just over 700 million US dollars, and between 3 to 5 years, works valued at 221 million US dollars. Clearly, for this to be achieved, each sector and every person in every sector is required to be on board. But what has been the economic performance and what has been the impact of Maria? Prior to the passage of Maria, we were on course to achieve economic growth in excess of 3% of GDP, real GDP. Our current estimate is for a decline of 3%, which means basically we've lost 6%. It is estimated, however, that the full impact of Maria will be felt in 2018, and we're looking at as much as 16% decline in the economy. Of course, these figures will be further refined as we undertake specific surveys, the national account surveys, to ensure that we capture fully and correctly the performance of each sector. As rehabilitation projects begin to take root, we expect to see some recovery from 2019, with growth being registered from 2019 and over the medium term. Fiscal prudence is a great imperative in these times. On the one hand, government must spend to ensure the economic activity continues, but over time we'll have to determine how to reduce expenditure where it is necessary. Government will be required to borrow to finance rehabilitation, and bearing in mind that in the last few years we have made significant progress in reducing debt levels, we expect that having to borrow to finance rehabilitation, the likelihood is that the debt to GDP ratio will rise. However, that can be contained if, as we enter into new debt and contract new debt, the projects which we implement contribute to growth so that there is a greater balance, and so in effect will not be significantly worse off. That, of course, again relies on the efficiency with which project funds and loan funds are utilized and the efficiency with which projects are implemented. That apart, though, we would be aware that government is relying to a large extent on raising its own revenue from the Citizenship by Investment Program, and the CBI proceeds will in fact contribute government's largest portion to the rehabilitation process. In addition, and in discussion with our development partners, we will seek to raise as much grants as is possible. We can confirm that government has remained current on all its obligations, and so all debt payments that have fallen due since the passage of Maria have in fact been made. We would also be aware that government has offered a very generous package of concessions post-hurricane, and while every effort has been made to collect revenues that are due, government has relied largely on the resources from the CBI proceeds to finance day-to-day activities. These expenditures include, but are not necessarily limited to, monthly salaries, purchasing housing material and facilitating quick responses to those who are in need, support for housing in general, including the construction of the 1,000 new homes, purchasing of housing materials that will be made available to the vulnerable groups, and supporting ongoing capital projects such as the construction of the River Defense Wall, the National Employment Program, and ongoing projects. The Ministry of Agriculture has also benefited as projects such as the Support to Horticulture project continues to be implemented, and we can see the benefits of some of that already, given the turnaround that we're seeing in agriculture with some short-term crops. Government has also facilitated the purchase of supplies to complement that which was distributed by. These supplies were distributed in communities throughout the country immediately after the storm. The post-storm cleanup and the immediate response works have been financed with resources obtained from the insurance, particularly the catastrophe risk insurance, which the government contributes to along with other members of the Caribbean. Contributions from various friendly governments, groups, and individuals. And of course, this has been supplemented by resources from the CBI. Among the most critical and the most obvious ones are the ongoing river dredging works and the houses which are being constructed. And as I indicated earlier, CBI resources will continue to finance in large measure government's contribution to the recovery effort. In respect of the balance of payments, we expect there to be a widening in the trade deficit. Exports in 2017 and 2018 fall relative to previous years, while imports are expected to increase as we strive to ensure that we have adequate building materials, machinery, and other goods necessary for the reconstruction process. The performance of the economy will depend to a large extent on how quickly we respond and how quickly we have already responded. And today, there are a couple of achievements that have contributed to the economy continuing to operate. Access has been created everywhere, so we can go basically to every place in Dominica, even where the conditions are not ideal. All schools are open. Major health services are available. Work has recommenced on projects started before the storm. And that is important because it means that people are back to work and that progress can be made in the implementation of these projects. The air and seaports are in operation. We've had the cruise ship coming back, returning. We've had the completion of the building damage assessments. That assessment will assist government and other agencies in formulating a complete plan for responding to the housing needs. A vulnerability needs assessment has been completed. Again, that work will assist government and agencies in directing support to the vulnerable groups. There's been training in resilient building standards, completed for over 300 builders, architects, and contractors, again, directly targeted at building resilience and ensuring that we build back better. We know the difficulties with the availability of building materials, and government has sought to address that in part by importing some building materials, at least, which could be targeted at particular groups in society. And to ensure that the productive sectors remain on board, there are a number of programs which have been undertaken. One is a cash for work and an emergency grant program, which has been rolled out, and that has been supported in part by government and in part by the development partners. And direct cash support to fishers, farmers, and small business owners, again, all intended to provide assistance so that there can be a quick response. What all of these activities have done is to ensure that economic activity continues, that people continue to meet their needs, and that services are provided throughout the country. How do we proceed with financing? Bearing in mind the numbers are indicated in terms of the needs, 3.7 billion EC dollars is a substantial sum in any circumstance, and for us it is. A number of donors have been approached and have in fact approached us. We have established that government will contribute to the recovery and the rehabilitation process, and that will come from local revenues and more so from resources we raised under the CBI. The financing being sought will be for a number of purposes. On the one hand, for technical assistance, we recognize that we will need added capacity. Yes, there are a number of hands here, but there are particular skills that may not be readily available to us, and in many instances, a number of hands are not available. There are a number of documents to be prepared. There are a number of substantial preparatory work to be done, and the technical assistance that will be sought would be targeted at those. Then there's the financing of the CRE, the Climate Resilience Executing Agency for Dominica, around which the coordination and the execution of the recovery will be done. And of course, the actual construction work, which is where the bulk of the funds will go. Funds for housing, rebuilding of houses, relocation of people, repair and replacement of government buildings, bridges, roads, school, health centers. Financing will be sought at a bilateral level, so governments speaking to friendly governments and governments speaking to institutions. But you will recall also that in November of 2017, a joint or collaborative effort between CARICOM and the United Nations, there was in fact a donors conference targeting funding for recovery in the Caribbean and all of the islands that were affected by the passage of Irma and Maria. And a number of our development partners did in fact make pledges and commitments to the region. Those funds would have to be disaggregated and shared among the VINT. In conclusion, I will say simply that fiscal sustainability and macroeconomic stability are necessary conditions for recovery. And in economics, we will say it's necessary but not necessarily sufficient. The economy will clearly recover faster if rehabilitation projects are undertaken in an efficient manner and in as timely a manner as possible. Government's challenge, therefore, would be to seek to facilitate that economic growth as much as possible without undermining the macroeconomic fundamentals. In other words, the economy has to survive, and there has to be a basis on which it can build. And so the immediate effort is to push for growth, to push for recovery, and ensuring that the needs of the citizens are met. But to do so, we have to ensure that we continue to have a very strong platform on which we could build. Thank you very much.